working on the technical difficulties.
That's my question.
We're going to go ahead and get started. So the date is December 7th, 2021, and the time is 4:37 p.m. And to ensure that we have a quorum present, I'm going to read out the names of the members.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
So we're going to read out the names of the members of the executive committee, and if you're here, please say present. All right, that's still not working. Richard Freitart, present. Colin Clark.
Present.
Present. Don Davidson. Good to see you. Cam Johnson. Present. Nice to see you. Ed Hart. Andre Present. Lyle Melville. John McPherson. Present. James Spade. Michael Stack. Present. John Becker. Here. Present. Ryan Moss. Thank you. I know the order of the executive committee present, and I'll call this a meeting to order of the executive committee of the Board of Uplift Education. Our first order of business, I'm going to turn it over to Alex Burke to see if we have any people who signed up for the community forum speakers.
Thanks, Richard. We do not have any community speakers signed up this afternoon, so we can move to the next item.
Okay. Before we move to the next item, Remy, I'm going to ask if you could introduce our newest hire, the Deputy Chief of Secondary Schools.
Yeah, sure thing. Good evening, everybody. There's probably not a happier person in the room than I am when adding on our Deputy Chief of Secondary Schools, Mr. Michael Carbone. Mike joined us November 1st officially, is that correct? And so we've been waiting for him.
Elena, can you hear anything?
He has.
I cannot hear you.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I'm not the only one.
No worries.
We're letting them know via chat to just hang tight.
No worries. Mike joined us from Seton Partners. He was the CAO of Berea Charter Schools. And I always get the East Coast state mixed up, Connecticut, New York-ish in that area. And so Mike, just welcome to our team. He's definitely had a fast and furious couple of weeks here, and we're so grateful to have him on our team to support our secondary campus.
Welcome, Michael. Good to see you. All right. Our next order of business is just to consider and take action on the minutes of the previous meetings. We had meetings on September 10th, October 26th, and November 16th. This was all part of your pre-read. Are there any questions from the board on the minutes? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the board minutes from, again, the September 10th, October 26th, and November 16th meetings as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any votes against the motion? The motion is approved by unanimous vote. The next order of business is we'll hear from Daniel Gray. Daniel is a managing director of our Road to College and Career, and we're going to get an update on that program.
Daniel, use your loudest of your voice. It just projects. Thank you.
No worries. Take the mask out to make it a little bit easier for folks to hear me. All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Gotcha.
Very cool. All right, we'll keep on going. There we go. Cool. All right, so why don't you really quickly go through, just kind of ground us in sort of the initial process that the Road to College Career team made a few years back. So about 3 years ago or so, we did some work with Bain, and team actually working with Adam Cox, to really make some expansions to what we were going to offer as a Road to College team at that time. Part of the expansion of that was really adding 3 kind of new focus areas that didn't exist previously. So in that time, we added the Career Exposure Office, the Family Involvement Office, and then the Alumni Career Office. So I wanted to come back and give really kind of an update on all 6 but I'm also going to focus on really kind of the career exposure team and the alumni career office, because that's really where we've been sort of leaning a lot of our focuses on lately, and trying to give a bit of an update there. So I wanted to, first step, just give a general overview of where we are in college, college right now. So one of the things that's happened over the last few years is that we've seen, just, mostly because of the pandemic, but also just because of just shifting priorities for students and really trying to find new ways of working, we've just seen college look different, and we've seen students attending college looking very different. So what we've seen really just over the last few years, we've seen a number of students really just like overall kind of a few things changing. So one, matriculation rate. So the students attending college, first time in college, we've seen those numbers drop precipitously. So in 2020, we actually saw four-year colleges have a drop of 16%, and then two-year colleges actually have a drop of nearly 23%. So again, just like massive shifts in terms of the number of students who are actually attending college compared to where we were in previous years. In 2021, we're actually seeing some of the same thing. We're seeing fewer students go, not as precipitous a drop, but still a relatively significant drop of students who are just not showing up, not going to school. So those who are planning on going to school, but in the end, not actually going or not going at all. And one of the things that we've actually seen is that really those drops have come more aggressively with Latinx and Black students, like the students that we serve at Uplift. And so that's something that, again, we're just, as a network, we're concerned about that. And as an individual who oversees this team, again, something that we're trying to work on. One thing we've also seen too, just nationally, is a FAFSA drop. FAFSA typically is pretty directly associated with how many students are actually attending school. And so seeing pretty significant drops from that is already pretty significant. So we saw 11% drop in 2021, and then this year we've already seen about a 17% drop as we're tracking towards. So obviously we've got a few months left of FAFSA still being able to get that done, but seeing already a 17% drop of students who just have not finished the FAFSA compared to where they were 2 years ago. One other thing too is that I'll have time at the end for questions, so if you've got questions, just write them down, I'll get to them. I know all this stuff pretty much, given this presentation a few times. So in terms of what we've seen at Uplift, we've actually seen slightly different concerns. We've seen some of the same concerns in terms of students maybe not going or not being certain about going, but what we've really seen though is a shift in terms of students, instead of going to four-year colleges aggressively like we've seen before, we've seen more of them make that shift to two-year schools. Part of that shift last year was based on the fact that college looked the same no matter where you were, whether you were sitting at home going to UT or sitting at home going to Dallas College. School looked the same. You were taking classes at home, in your bedroom, no matter where you may have been. And so we saw students strategically make a shift in terms of where they were going. What we've seen this year is somewhat slightly different. We're seeing students just make choices based on what's happening in the moment for them. So instead of thinking through like, all right, if I do this schooling for the next 4 or 5 years, it'll put me in a place where I can make X number of $1,000 more than I might make in a few years. What we're actually seeing with our students doing is they're making the decision to go to a 2-year school in the moment, and then in that same moment, being able to work and stay at home. So now what you have is a family that maybe made $40,000 a year previously as a family before, now is making $60,000 a year because they've added an additional person. That's for all of us, that's a significant jump to see a $20,000 increase in terms of what students and families are bringing in. And so you're just seeing a different sort of shift, a different sort of calculus around how students are making decisions and around how families are making decisions compared to where they may have done previously. We've also seen an increase just in sort of that third box, that non-college pathways. What that really has to do with is there are a number of different programs that exist sort of locally. So Year Up, Erstolas, South Dallas Works. All these programs are sort of like, get you trained up, get you ready for a career, get you ready for a job, and then get you into that job as quickly as possible. We've seen more students jump into those programs. We've also done a better job on our side also of helping students understand cosmetology programs and being able to help students get into those, understand construction, getting into those jobs. But we are still concerned about this just broader shift of moving more kids to 2 years. We just haven't seen our students be successful at 2-year schools. Our graduation rate over the course of our time at Uplift is about 6%. So when our students enroll at a 2-year school, they haven't graduated. We'd love to say that they're doing better, they're getting better, but we're not seeing really the improvement that we'd like to see from them. There we go. So I'm going to pause and sort of let you, there's a lot of information on this, so I'm going to sort of pause and let you all look at it. But wanted to just show sort of the different changes year over year by high school. And so you can see our different high schools. The high schools are on the left, 2020 and then 2021. So I'll pause for a minute and let you all look at those numbers really quick.
What are those percentages?
So what they are is the split of how many students went to a four-year school. So the first row, 2024 year, 2021 are students who went to a two-year, and then 2021, that's students planning on attending a four-year, 2021, students planning on attending a two-year.
You could take Uplift Grand as an example, right, where, I mean, there's a win that 69% of the kids went off to school in 2020 versus 83% in this last class. But you see this shift happening in mix that Daniel's referring to, where 18% went to a two-year in 2020, but 26% went in 2021. So that's a mixed story for us, right? There's a win in it, but it's not the way we would have wanted to have gotten to the 83% versus the 69.
Yeah. If you look at Infinity and Williams, they're probably two of the more aggressive shifts around where students sort of made the calculus change. So previously we saw, right around 50% of the students attending four-year schools. What we saw this year really was that number shift where 50% of the students went to two-year schools. So just a dramatic shift in terms of where students were choosing to go, and sort of where they were before.
Question. Peak in particular seems like a real success story, 39 to 45, 29 to 35, and 68 to 80. Is there something specific that happened at Peak?
New counselors. Yeah. So they had two new counselors that came on board. That's not exclusively the reason. I would say about what it was too. So they're just what Peak has done and Atlas now has done. I think is they've been willing to sort of open up their doors and say, help us out, give us support. So myself, our director of college admissions, has really done a lot of work of like sort of sitting with that campus, working with them on that list, on their list, and trying to be really, really like focused around how we're coaching students. And what we've also seen too is that school's done a good job of working and getting students into UNT Dallas actually, and really sort of pushing the process of getting students, as many students. So instead of saying, go to the two-year, that's fine, take care of your basics there, they're saying, go to like a UNT Dallas, go to a Texas A&M Commerce, take care of your basics there. If you want to transfer to UT or UT Dallas or whatever the case may be after that, do that then, but do that at a four-year school instead. There we go. All right. So reasons for the dramatic shift. One, just sort of give some context around why we've seen some of the shifts we've seen. I think it's sort of two things that are happening at the same time. One is financial aid. We've just seen less money, the money coming later, and the money just not allowing for the packages to match the needs of our students who are going to private schools. In the past, a large percentage of students went to private school. We're seeing that drop further. What we've seen is that, I'm sure most of you have heard that phrase, test optional. What that's actually done, instead of benefiting our students who did really well on ACT, it's sort of, I don't want to say even, it's changed the playing field. And I think it's changed the playing field in ways that I don't think colleges, four-year schools are really ready to understand. And so they've tried to adjust on the fly, but the amount of work it would have taken to really do that test optional shift well, compared to schools who've been doing test optional for a number of years, just I don't think that they were able to take the time to actually do that. And so what you saw was, and I'll use like even a school like here in the city, SMU, they were actually willing to work with us, and they reached out to me. We had a couple students that applied with their ACT scores. They called me and they said, hey, if these students took their test scores off, we could actually like get them in, get them more money. But what that was essentially was at the expense of other students that we had that actually had strong scores, but not maybe not the GPA, maybe not the other activities that these students had. And so it just became this thing where it really felt more like we're fighting over the same pot of dollars in this, rather than there's enough money to go around for all the students that we're trying to serve. Secondly, is around counselor development. We've seen a lot of just turnover in our counselor development for good reasons. Oftentimes, many of them getting promoted. We have a couple that now are here at the CMO that get promoted to direct level roles. But that transition, that turnover, that just led to a less experienced counselor group. And that less experienced counselor group just has a tougher time, I think, navigating some of the conversations. Like I mentioned here, is that really we just have very few counselors that have had lots of experience going through lots of college cycles. And for a lot of them, this past year, this pandemic year, was an even more challenging year. So trying to have a conversation with the family about like why your students should go out to some school in the middle of Pennsylvania, the calculus around that conversation just feels very different for a family that has different needs, more dire needs, more immediate needs, than going off to that four-year school, that great school that actually would help you graduate, but the needs are just different in terms of what that student's doing. So really, again, it's like, so seeing financial aid practices just look different, while also seeing our counselor development just needing to do a little bit more work to get them better faster. And then in terms of like what we're doing just to like create some improvement and really try and like navigate back to where we want to be, we can't control financial aid, but what we can do is actually just do a lot more work around giving our scholars, our counselors, knowledge around all the different scholarships that are available. So we've done some more work to really create more systems of like, these are scholarships that all your students work with. We've worked with the Melville Family Foundation to create another scholarship with Erickson. We've worked with a number of other folks. So we're trying to find new ways of helping students find money to attend these schools. We've also tried to do a little bit tighter development around how we're working with our counselors and how we're working with our teams of college prep on campuses, by really just working with them a lot closer. We do a bi-weekly call with them. We do multiple trainings a month now. We just sort of shifted what the process is for them. And like I mentioned before, we really want to focus on helping them get better faster by helping them understand like what are the basic things that they need to understand kind of as the year starts to get like college lists, right? And then what are the things they need to understand to be able to ask the right questions to families and to students when it comes time to be able to make college choices. In terms of stuff that I'm doing, it's a lot of stuff, but really I think a lot of it really just follows up with like getting better at showing the right people the information they need to know, helping our DCPs get better, our teams of college get better, helping our school leaders better understand like this is actually the profile of how your school has shifted, and this is what it looks like now. You've been graduating 50-60% of your students from college in the last number of years. Having this many go to a 2-year, it would be unlikely for you to continue that rate going with what your students are now doing. So helping our school leaders understand that really if they want to see their students graduate at a higher rate, graduate at the rate that they believe they should be graduating at, then really we just need to make some shifts around how we're having conversations with family and ask our school leaders to get more involved with those conversations in a way that helps push them forward and helps push our school leaders forward. We've also made some shifts around just the way we do alumni success. It's what we want at the bottom. One of the things that we had gotten to is that we have sort of shifted the model to really have our alumni success counselors be targeted on focusing on supporting specific universities. And what that was is at the expense of actually building those really deep relationships with our students as they were graduating from their senior year. This past year, or this past really a few months back, we just made a shift around how we're going to do that. So really our alumni success counselors, no matter what school they're going to support the different high schools, they will stay with those students no matter where those students go. So if they go off to a school in Pennsylvania, we have one that goes to Pennsylvania, one that goes to New York, someone that goes to here in Texas, they will still be the relationship person. They will be, so really it's more of a relationship manager type structure, rather than kind of owning a specific school in a way to do that. So just a shift to really try and create more changes the way that we do that there. In terms of post-secondary, so of course, so really kind of taking that alumni piece further and kind of going, just wanted to show you all some just brief data around like what we've seen in terms of students there. So we've also seen, not only have we seen a drop in students actually matriculating in college, we've seen a pretty significant drop in terms of students staying in school. So we've actually seen a pretty large drop. Largest drop was from our Latinx students, so a 3.3% drop. This is not Uplift, this is national. And then seeing community colleges had a 3.5% year-over-year drop in terms of students staying enrolled. At Uplift, we're dealing with many of the same concerns. 4-year colleges, actually, our students who went to 4-year schools, they re-enrolled at the same rates we've seen normally. It was really our 2-year schools we just saw a massive drop in terms of our students going. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the calculus became just different for why they made the choices that they made. And so that's something we're just trying to work with them on. And so for them, that need to work, which is more pressing in that moment than staying in school and continuing to stay enrolled. Cool. And then ways of addressing this concern, really we're doing a couple things. You all should have gotten, I think they're all here, I think Pepsi thought it was good too. So just a calendar of post-secondary support, so really the steps that we're taking from our team to try and support students better and give them a better chance of being successful. So wanting to make sure that we're doing more work around trying to engage our students and find different ways of engaging them. Previously, we sort of engaged them at like very specific intervals. What we wanted to do really was like create a structure for how we do the engagement, but also find ways of being able to deepen that engagement, deepen those investments, deepen that relationship while we're doing that at the same time. And so that's a part of what's happening there. Creation of alumni goal setting programs, so really working closely with our alums, so going back to sort of the work that we're doing here, and doing more work to help them with like, we're doing on the K-12 side of helping kind of build that career setting, that career exploration, give them a chance to understand this is what I want to do long term. We're also doing the same thing with our alumni, building up that alumni goal setting, helping them really build a plan of action for what they want to do long term, and being able to like build into that, lead into that. And then really a multi-pronged approach. So really, our approach previously had been like really like sort of alumni. Like if you went to college, you got alumni success support. If you went into career, you got career support. We're really sort of stacking those two right now. So every student will get both supports. So they will both get the alumni success support, no matter what they do, they'll also get the career support stacked on top of that as a way to help them find that way to career, internship, whatever the case may be, and what their needs are. Career support, so this is actually, so that was sort of the end of the post-secondary piece. This is really more of our K-12, so the shift that we're making K-12 wise. Just want to give an update in terms of where we were. So we've actually, we're working with, and some of the work that we're changing actually is sort of building up our overall K-12 support for career exposure. And so we're actually doing our first like full K-12 career week. So we're working with our high school leadership team, working with our middle school and our elementary school leadership team to really build that out. Working with our high school curriculum team to build up our career and technical education. What we wanted to do is really be able to tie and create more credentialing programs. We've never really had students get credentialed. It's never really been at our core, because our goal has always been getting students to college. So what we want to do actually is create opportunities for students to have to attain credentials while in high school and use those as ways to apply to college still. So that doesn't mean that we're having to go into whatever field that is. We want them to be able to have that as another feather in their cap as they apply to college to be able to use that. We're also developing a Life After Uplift curriculum. So we have RTCC has 2 classes, an 11th grade class and a 12th grade class. In those classes, we've built in Life After Uplift classes. And what those really do the work of helping students understand even the things as simple as like budgeting. Like how do you budget? How do you take care of your own finances? Really building that into the curriculum to help our students understand that. And then last but not least, I only have 6 of these. I didn't have very many. They're actually here in the office today, but I'll pass them around if y'all want to just take a quick glance at them. We're building a partnership with a program called GPS Education Partners. And what GPS is a work-based learning program. That's not work really sort of all over the country, mostly in Wisconsin. And really what we're trying to do is make sure that our students, before they leave us, have some sort of really thoughtful, really meaningful work-based learning experience that allows them to understand, one, what do I care about, what do I want to do, and how does what I want to do help me get to a better career? What are the types of schools that I can apply to, what are the types of colleges that I should be able to be applying to, what are the majors that I should be studying, and using that as a way to really help students when they leave our schools really understand, like, one, this is what I care about, this is what matters to me, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I think one of the things that we're really trying to like tighten up our language around is not, I think oftentimes we got stuck in that like either college or career, and really we have to do a better job of from our side, and I say me specifically in this, is doing a better job of saying like, college is career, no matter what you're doing, really you're going to have a career at some point in time in your life, and so what is the work that we can do to help you get to that space one way or the other? So with that, I'm done.
Daniel, if you don't mind pausing for a second,
Yeah.
we think the mic might be working, so we wanted to wait, and we're going to do a quick mic check.
Maybe a little bit of
Can
water
our
before I
friends
start.
online hear me speaking and testing the microphone? Sounds like we might have sound to our group joining via Teams.
Ask Elena if she can give you a thumbs up.
Elena, could you give us a thumbs up if you can hear us better now?
I've got a whole text chain going with them. I'm so sorry, guys.
Could someone give us a thumbs up if you can hear the sound now to our Teams friends?
She's typing.
No, I can't.
We're going to wait a second, though. Right. Nope. Nope.
All right, just testing one more time. Can the group on Teams hear us?
But just we're doing career, basically, we're just want to volunteer.
All right. We're going to go ahead and keep going with questions for Daniel, comments, and
Yeah.
feedback.
So one thing I'm actually passing around, so like I mentioned before, we have a K-12 career week coming up. I'm passing out a sign-up sheet. If you or someone you know or want to volunteer to sign up, you can have them sign. You can sign either your name up or their name up, and we'll reach out to them and ask them to be a speaker for us.
So a couple of questions, if I could. Daniel, thank you. Great presentation. Well, first of all, for those of us who are interested, can we have the slides?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll send them out to everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, 100%.
The I think first slide or first couple when you showed the declines in 2021,
Yeah.
rather alarming numbers. Were those just a minor point, but relative to 20 or relative to 19?
Those would have been class of 20 students not enrolling in the 2021 school
Yeah,
year.
but
First
there were
college
these big
year.
declines from 19 to 20.
Yeah.
Then another big decline from the lower base.
Right. exactly.
It's-
So
it's-
it is
it's
a
enormous.
continued decline from where we were.
I submit it's too big a shock to be explained by the financial aid story unless the financial aid story was like an earthquake.
Yeah, so from like the Uplift side, like we're fine. I think what we've seen just like nationally is I think that broader population around, or that broader conversation around like students just making a different choice, I think really is the big thing. I think students are just making like, I have to get a job. I think really a lot of it came down to, I don't know what the pandemic's gonna be. I don't know how long it's gonna last, so I need to find a job to help me like make money for my family as quickly as possible.
I think what you just put your finger on is something profound, right? If really large numbers of young people all over the country thought what you just thought. My other question, so I'd love to understand that better over time, because clearly that's just central. And then the other question is, when you show the 2-year versus 4-year, and I think we all kind of are probably looking at that with the idea of like, rising 2-year is bad, the 4-year going down is bad, right? We're aspiring to 4-year. I am inclined to be convinced, but it would be nice for us to be even more convinced by, data about what happens with our students when they go to 4-year versus our students when they go to 2-year. And of course, if we really want to understand it, we need to understand not just this crowd versus that crowd, because they're very different crowds to start with, probably, right? It would be like what happens if the kid that you thought would go to 4-year goes to 2-year, or the kid you thought would go to 2-year goes to 4-year.
Yeah.
I mean, I encourage, if you don't already have that, to kind of understand in a little bit more rigorous way just how much better, if we really want to push them towards 4-year. I suspect you're right, but if that's a systematic decision across the whole network, we should have really robust. So do we, I should make it a good question.
We do, yeah, that's fine.
Tell us more.
Yeah, so I think what I would almost say there is that like students who are already really strong students who are already like relatively well resourced do fine at 2 years. And again, I think 2 years, there's a role that 2 years play that is that they are very good at. They are meant to create access to opportunity that like doesn't exist in many other places. What we've seen though is that unfortunately, because of like just like the services at a lot of the 2 years are just so stretched that it becomes challenging for students who already need more support to be able to be successful there. And so really, like in terms of that 6% number, nearly every one of those students is a student who actually got into a fairly good 4-year school and just chose to go to 2-year because it made sense to them at that moment. So we've seen a handful of students from like Summit who went to the local 2-year that's actually really close to where Summit is, and then transferred to UT Arlington. But that was part of a broader program that existed that allowed the students to transfer over relatively early into their college career. We've also seen some of the same things. So Texas Tech and then Emory University as well, they both have 2-year schools that are sort of embedded within those schools. Those types of programs we've seen students do well, as well as a school like a Navasota that is a residential 2-year school that's in sort of I was gonna say middle of nowhere, not middle of nowhere, in just a different sort of space that sort of pulls students into a space where they have to really be invested to go. We've seen students do fine there. What we've seen really just struggle-wise is our students who are less college ready, so in terms of GPA, ACT score, based on that, being considered less college ready, they've struggled at Dallas College and they've struggled at Tarrant County College. That's really just sort of the problem. So really, like I said, if it is a strong student, they tend to do fine, kind of to your point. If they already have, good study skills, they already have a good understanding of what the ways that they learn best, and they're able to really enact those, they tend to do better. Still not as well as they typically do at a 4-year school, but tend to do better. But that's really, I would say, is sort of the gap there. I would give you percentages, but I don't want to misspeak. But in terms of what we've seen, we've just seen there really is very much a curve of how students tend to do a little bit better at 2-year based on how they did in high school.
I wanted to also add to that. So I think you're bringing up a really good point, Tom. I'd also love to see how it connects back to the bank information, right? So I think that, we visited that, we all went into the pandemic, and then I think that a lot of that, we haven't heard of where we are in some of that. So thinking about the findings that relate to that bank study, which come out and say, these kids are not being, well staffed, even after they get these degrees, right? So I think of, to your point about getting that long term or that kind of down the road view of the data, and understanding then how can we do intervention to ensure that we're bringing that together. So I'd love to see, make that connection to some of the larger strategic priorities and some of the larger gaps that have already been identified. So when we go through these, we can see, the different kind of points and how this is either widening those gaps or closing those gaps whenever y'all present information. The other thing I would say is, have y'all looked into, and I know that Remy and I had talked a lot about kind of the financial literacy, personal finance type of stuff, but also looking at the multitude of different types of college support. So thinking about match savings programs, right now there's a bill in Congress called the Earn to Learn Act, which is a massive expansion of match savings programs. And then the expansion of the 529 across the U.S. You know, there's a lot of funders, there's a lot of folks and organizations that are, you know, interested in, you know, also getting some of that sweat equity from families and students, and then matching that as we go through. So just would also like to understand, outside of scholarships, what are some of the other opportunities that, you know, and I think that specifically is a growing industry, you know, and another way of supporting students. So
yeah, it's an area that I mean, we've done research into it. We haven't, I would say, enacted it like network-wide yet. I think it's definitely a space that like we should at some point like look into like how we can take advantage of something like that and use that. But we haven't, I would say, not up to this point, haven't done that as a network-wide issue that we're working on that way.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Just maybe two things I would add. One is just a little bit on this theme of like the data behind this. I don't know if we ever came back and shared with this group that after the first study we did with Uplift scholars, we actually went and sort of created a similar study across 7 or 8 other charter school networks, so much sort of larger sample size. It actually went much deeper on like the data science in terms of drawing out kind of more causal implications of kind of some of these choices. And I think we'll say largely it aligned with kind of what I think we did share with this group in the smaller setting. We were able to kind of dig a little bit deeper. But I think all of that is survey based. And so I think and I think, Ricky, this is a little bit the point you're raising of, you know, as we start to get more actual data on career outcomes and get kind of a bigger database of that, of our scholars' outcomes, so we're not having to kind of go back and selectively survey people who are then self-reporting retrospectively and kind of spotty data, all those sorts of things. I think that just gives us better ability to really track how this is actually playing out between college and career.
Then a couple questions. Staffing and professional development. Given the reset of workforce gaps in the industry, needing workforce quicker.
Yeah.
I know I'm at Terry County College, 10 years, and one of the things we're being more intentional about working with industry. You're in school, yet you're also getting licenses and internships. So there's an expedited process going on. Thus, industry's coming to us. We're creating programs to help them fill gaps quicker. So I know we're doing that. That's been a huge shift, so that being more attractive for folks locally. I can say personally, folks making those kind of 4-year versus 2-year get to work decisions quickly. And so just an observation there. Staffing, professional development, given the reset of counseling specifically, talk about how they're being trained to be prepared for the new shift.
Yeah, so we really just sort of, I think, adjust the way we do training kind of broadly. So really, we've actually built in, I would say, a 4-year scope as because of what we want our counselors to be able to walk away with. I think one of the problems we ran into last year was it assumed a full year of being able to make decisions around the conversation. This is where we made the change around like how do we get better, faster with this conversation. And so I think like in terms of how we shifted it, really we've tried to bring in a lot more career coaching into that conversation. That was a piece that we never did before. Really, we didn't even do like major coaching. It was just like, here's the school, apply to the school, let's go to the school. Really what we try to do is really be much more aligned around like, all right, you've shown a proclivity to doing this thing. You have an interest in this thing. Let's make sure that like, let's look at like what schools have this major, let's have you apply to that major. What we're also trying to do, and this is part of really the work that we're doing with the GPS education partners, is really trying to build out what we do on the K-12 side around helping students understand like, these are all the different programs that exist, and then training our counselors simultaneously in all those same programs, so that we're making sure that like as we're getting our scholars more information, we're also giving our counselors better training around how to have those conversations with scholars around what they're choosing for careers.
So I know at Terry County College, we've got counselors that know how to counsel in coding, medical coding, right? We've got counselors counseling gaming, okay? The millennials that are coming through, I mean, we're drifting to new industries that weren't there 20 years ago. So just a suggestion there that these counselors now, they're not your traditional counselors. Some of them are retired in industry, that we're bringing on to be able to talk specific to the new industry that's coming. So
and we do bring in folks from like externals because like, we aren't masters of all that information. Right. I think one of the things we run into is just like just the sheer amount of information we're asking our counselors to understand is like you have to be good at college and you have to be able to understand career. Right. And it's been a challenging thing for counselors to be able to like understand both at the same level of complexity. the other thing too is like that's built into that is that like they are hired as college ground counselors, so like their natural proclivity is to want to do college counseling. And so what we're having to do really is sort of, one, I think there's probably like a nomenclature shift we just have to start to make with them that we're working on just in terms of how we talk about everything. I think the second piece of that also is like how do we build up their training? Like they most likely won't be able to like get to a place where they can be career counselors, but how do we build them up enough to where they can have really, really thoughtful conversations with scholars, with families around the decisions that they're making. And that's what the second piece we're working with. We have our career team really doing work of trying to like educate our counselors in a really thoughtful way. We also have our career coaches, our career team, doing the work of actually sitting with scholars, sitting with families, so they're making those conversations as well too. So it's not just on our college counselors to only make those conversations by themselves.
I just want to add one quick thing though. Something I do encourage Daniel to do with his colleagues, Mike, and our curriculum team managers, that scholars spend 7/8 of their day with somebody else that's not a counselor. And so how are we expanding our teacher knowledge around what are the careers? Because when we went to school, like the careers don't currently exist, and so we've got some work on the teacher end as well, and the curriculum end as well, to make sure that career and other college options are also included. So.
Any other questions? Awesome, thank you all.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, we have Dr. John Gaskett and for an update on the well-being and SEL.
Ready. Thank you, Richard. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. My goal is to provide about 15 minutes of talking time and information and about 15 minutes to listen to your questions. So without further ado, a little bit of a provocative slide.
Do you mind projecting just a little more, please?
A little bit louder?
Just a little louder.
Yeah, okay, happy to. This is a very busy slide, but I want to share, like, I'm a part of a lot of different communities across the globe that are tapped into like predictive analytics about what we're facing, and this confluence of factors that's making schooling and other things in our communities much more difficult to adapt to and deal with. So times are hard, we know that, and it's not likely to get better anytime soon. So what we're seeing, just for example, when you look at World Health Organization data and CDC data, the strands of epidemic and disease that are on the horizon are much more frightening than COVID-19. So just getting ready for that is going to be a challenge. And so we're seeing a confluence of like these forces that are kind of, intersecting to make things difficult. So look what happened with COVID-19, stress, anxiety, and depression. I'll just name a few of these. The American Psychological Association says that by 2030, the greatest public health epidemic in America will be depression. And that will particularly affect young people in sort of the 6th through 12th grade range much more acutely. And so how do you go about the business of schooling when a fair number of young people may or may not be diagnosed with clinical depression? And so creating the conditions for them to feel like they belong, that they're getting support clinically while they can achieve all that we want them to will increasingly become difficult. When you pull all these factors together, fragility of support ecosystems. I'll give you one example. In health services, we thought we had everything nailed down, and then we found out, oh, they need other immunizations, like meningococcal. It turns out the supply chain for immunizations has been severely disrupted. And so we had a large number of young people that we almost had to ask to not come back to school because they weren't meeting state law, because we just don't have enough meningococcal vaccine in the community to be able to immunize them. And so we're seeing this disruption of our ecosystems that historically immunizations, we've had that nailed down. It's harder. So what I'm seeing, what many are seeing is, and this may be playing out in some of what Daniel presented about what young people are thinking about when it comes to college choice, is there's a meaning crisis, right? And so what we're working to and through in our classrooms is not only addressing all that we need to as far as education, but helping young people find meaning and purpose. And it's not been easy. So in order to have the best shot to set scholars up for success in families, we've developed an integrated support model. I'll let you take a look at that. My team, I'll give you a little bit more of an insight. Ranges, we have a focus on staff well-being, but counseling and prevention all the all the way around. And so we're set up to be able to support all of our different divisions and departments in local schools to have the kinds of supports we believe will be essential to help our scholars succeed. A little bit about the well-being team. I started in November 2019, and we've grown tremendously since then. So our team sort of now is made up of physical education and athletics, health services, social emotional learning and restorative practices, and then counseling and prevention. Some of you may have heard a few of our innovations. We're now offering family therapy. So our social behavioral counselors at the local level are creating referrals for families so they can get whole family therapy in the midst of it. So we've grown pretty tremendously in a couple of years. A lot of that due to COVID. I want to start with giving you some information about how the staff are doing as it pertains to well-being. And thanks to Ann and her team, we've added some questions to our Gallup Q12, which gives us a little bit of a pulse about how staff are doing. And we started asking them questions about their well-being. And so we had a really good turnout. We don't have any real comparison data yet with well-being questions, and so this is what we've gotten out of a total of out of a 5. And so you see here a frequency distribution of how they responded. A big win about this is that we treasure what we measure. So the fact that we're asking staff regularly how they're doing gives us an opportunity to be responsive and help support solutions to help them level up, because we know that stressed out teachers serving stressed out kids is a recipe for difficulty. And so we're really trying to help support leaders with adaptive solutions to continue to help staff level up. We're providing a variety of supports. The challenge with providing well-being supports is it's voluntary, it's optional. It's not easy for someone to walk through the door of well-being and make changes in their life so they can feel better and be better, but we're trying to do so at scale. And so we've rolled out a variety of interventions and opportunities to help support our staff to get better, because we know the more they feel stable in the midst of adversity, the more that the young people that they serve will feel that benefit. One thing I'd like to point out is this well-being concierge concept, which we'll roll out when we come back from the break, is really giving people like an on-demand access to a system where they can submit help tickets about challenges that they're facing, whether it's individually, small groups, grade levels, campus, and departments. So we're trying to become more sophisticated in how we can support staff in the midst of this noble enterprise. I want to talk about health services for a minute. As you can imagine, this team has been really stressed out for the last couple of years, but has been hard at work really trying to improve scholar health and reduce inequalities. So priorities for us continue to be trying to help scholars have access to a medical home, and get primary care and the other services that they need. We've been hard at work addressing food insecurity, and so we've rolled out actually a food pantry, we call it Uplift Market, to better serve scholar food insecurity needs in the network, because if they come to school hungry, it's hard to learn. Wins during the year, of course, like our COVID-19 supports, I'll show you some data in a minute, were really just tremendous, and what we were able to do from a testing and a vaccination perspective. But we're continuing to experience, I'll point out one, staff turnover. If you're a nurse right now, especially in RN, it's a good market. So nurses on average in schools have a salary band that they can double if they go into the hospital setting or in the market. So we've lost a lot of nurses, and it's hard to recruit them these days. So we're doing our best to try to keep our team held harmless, but it's been a challenge. A little bit more about COVID-19. Really exciting trend line here. We instituted a network mask requirement several weeks ago, and I think you'll see we made a drastic difference in the reported cases of COVID, not only among our staff, but among our scholars. And so recently, we made the decision to invite people to continue to wear a mask, optionally if they want to, but without the requirement. That did create some morale, so it's nice to be able to read people's signals. They say babies are really struggling right now in childcare, because if you pull your mask off, like babies read signals, and so like what's cool about adults too is so do we. So it's nice to see that. Check this out. We did about 7,000 tests already year to date this year. Rapid tests, getting people tested for COVID. So if you think about the kind of on-the-ground operation that needs to happen, and what we're talking about is a one person per campus that's rolling out all this testing. It's been pretty amazing what we've been able to do, and testing is so important, as many of us know, because it gives people a sense of safety and psychological security if you know what you're dealing with. To date, we've vaccinated 790 staff and 670 scholars, so really proud of the work that we've been able to do. I want to shift and talk about counseling and prevention. Another good market to be in right now is if you're in the mental health market. It turns out if you're a counselor, you can actually go into private practice now and do quite well for yourself. And so we've been struggling with staff turnover with our counselors. In our clinical caseloads that you can see have escalated. And so counselor burnout is something that we're looking at and trying to support. But I want you to take a look at the number of cases, the referrals and sessions that we've been supporting over time. And you'll see that just year to date, we've had 9,807 individual counseling sessions with scholars. And so scholars are coming out. Many of them have spent 18 months in the shadows and have a lot to talk about and share about, but some of it is not so nice. So we've seen Child Protective Service referrals, unlike we've seen in the sort of the history of Uplift, really start to skyrocket. So instances of abuse, now that scholars have adults that they perceive that care about them and they're there to support them, they're reporting more and more cases of abuse at home. And so that we've been concerned about that rise. In the bottom, you'll see what were the kinds of counseling sessions that we're seeing, and you'll see in sort of comparison year to year some pretty significant increases in the kinds of counseling needs that our scholars have. Social and emotional learning, this is a proactive strategy to try to help young people build competencies so that they have durability in the midst of adversity. So we believe that our SEL work in collaboration with academics is about durability and helping them develop competencies that will help them become more self-aware and better collaborators. Now, I want to show you some of the data. One of the things we rolled out this year was a daily, if you want to, tool called Rhythm to measure exactly where scholars are at in terms of their own regulation. And so when you know if they're ready to learn, the way in which they report that gives you some ways to be responsive if you need to help them. So we're seeing pretty good usage. We've got some work to do if you look across primary, middle, and high school. Our tempo score, which is the overall average of what kids are reporting out, you want to be no less than 70%. And so we've seen a lot of fluctuation in tempo score, but I'm really proud of what our educators and our teachers and our counselors and our leaders have done to really try to help stabilize the operating environment in our classrooms. And so that's showing up in the data. We do continue to struggle with scholar sense of belonging. So one of our network strategic priorities is try to achieve 70% of all of our scholars feeling like they belong with us at Uplift. And so we're seeing struggles. It's not surprising that sense of belonging in primary is much higher than middle and high school, because that's what happens as you kind of grow in age. You become a bit more self-aware. But we want to continue to work together to figure out ways to support scholars so that they feel like they belong. That'll show up better in our enrollment data and our retention data over time. A few more to go. So restorative practice is like what happens when scholars make poor decisions. Like what do we do when they don't make the best decisions? So we have been working hard to create a restorative way to deal with scholars who don't make the best decisions. And so we've got a new team in place to support our campuses. Dr. Washington was sharing with me one of the most popular positions that people want is what we call a student support specialist, which is a dedicated person on the campus that can do really targeted work with scholars who are struggling in their behavior. So a little bit of data about it. One of our goals from a diversity and equity and inclusion is to really try to start moving away from what we call exclusionary discipline, which is A frequent tool to do that is in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and expulsion. And so I want to give you a sense of where we are to date on those measures. Last year is a little bit of a wash because a lot of young people were virtual, and so we didn't have a lot of ISS and OSS. But if you look at 2019 to 2020 trends, what's encouraging is that we have a magnitude of behavior disruption this year that's really significant. But what's good to see is the practices that ordinarily schools will do just to try to mitigate that actually have been showing up as far less than they have in the past. And so we think that what leaders and teachers and others are doing in our schools is they are, the notion of restoration is sinking in. And so the kind of practices that we're engaging in are much more restorative than exclusionary. Expulsions, this is when you reach the point when you're no longer a student at Uplift. You can see year to date, a couple of years ago, we were already at 29 last year, at 3, and this year at 5. And sometimes the decisions that Scholar makes from a legal perspective make expulsion absolutely mandatory in a direction we have to go in. But to the degree that we can do all that we can to help them stay the course, that's what restorative practices are all about. So we've got some time for questions. So that's this. I'm really proud of like Amanda Martin and others in our network that we've been able to start to pull together an integrated dashboard so we can more regularly track well-being outcomes and manage by those. And so we think that sort of in collaboration with our partners on the academic side of the house and other sides, we can truly get to our goal of whole scholar by focusing on this work and being responsive to all the different issues that scholars are grappling with.
I'll just ask a question. When you have this intervention, whether it's a parent or a scholar, what type of feedback do you get on how successful you are, either from the one that's directly or indirect, to know that you're doing the type of job that's really been more helpful than just going through the motion?
Yeah, great question. So I would say there's a few ways we do that. So we do administer like sort of client satisfaction surveys throughout the year now with families and locally, and so that gives us a picture of it. But what we're also tracking is like how many times the scholar are they coming back to see the counselor, or maybe shifting from a counseling environment to like a discipline environment. And so that gives us also some insight into how it's going. And one challenge though is, because if you saw the caseloads that our counselors are facing, by virtue of the nature of the demand, there's only so much time they can give, and so our counseling is short-term in nature, and so there are things that we see show up that just require a different kind of support over time that, maybe with family therapy we can mitigate it a bit more, but our partnerships in the community, Richard, are really strong, and so we're trying to get scholars access to more comprehensive supports. What the pandemic has created, though, is another supply chain issue where everything that we've historically offered for free in the community is dried up. And so the opportunities to get access in the community, I think will really represent a challenge over time to get what they need.
I will share, it's just an anecdotal story, but I was on a campus at one of our high schools and was waiting to speak with the principal. A parent was in with the principal and their child talking about a discipline situation that had taken place. And afterwards I was debriefing with our principal, and she was saying that literally the parent openly acknowledged, like, I know if my child was at another school, it would have been immediately like expelled or suspended. Like they wouldn't be here. And because my child is just one of a number. Our high schools are so small relative to large comprehensive high schools, and the parent openly acknowledged and realized that these restorative conversations, which take far longer than the efficiency of punitive discipline, was unique to our setting. So that was just a great moment to see parents even acknowledging that. But it does take time, and that's just an extra lift for our school leaders. Because again, like to really understand root cause, coach through it, that's a 2-hour conversation and interaction versus I disciplined you for calling your parents, you're stepping off the campus today.
Maybe kind of a impossibly big question, but I think Yasmin has briefed us periodically on some of the kind of ugly behaviors we've seen, by teenagers, which of course teenagers will always engage in with a certain frequency, but it sounds from the professionals like it's pretty bad these days. So what do you think are the most important drivers? I mean, is it too much time away from school, being stuck at home? What are we really wrestling with here?
Well, that initial slide where I showed like the confluence, I think, you sort of see the interactions between like what our communities are facing, from food insecurity, a lack of healthcare access, that continues to be problematic in what we see. I do think that what's happened over the last 18 months in terms of like how different it was for scholars, where there was a big disruption in their development, and quite frankly, a lot of unknowns about what they were dealing with at home. They, in some cases, didn't remember what collaboration and cooperation looks like in learning. They maybe were not accustomed to talking to adults in particular ways, and so that shows up in some cases as disrespect. On a more critically concerning level is we're seeing a lot of behaviors sexually, for example, that are very predatory. That are showing up much more than in the past, and some of the violent gestures, that scholars are sort of resorting to solve problems, seem a bit more extreme than at least what I've seen in the 2 years that I've been here. So I think the combination of what the population of students that we predominantly serve already embody in what they deal with in their communities, compounded with, the unique signature the pandemic has made for, I'll give you an example. I spoke to a teacher recently, and she said she seemed very, she had a sense of self-efficacy in the past that she said that she always had, and she's always had a certain level of success, and yet it's December, and she still doesn't feel she's been able to regulate the classroom. And so, like, what we're seeing is what we typically might be able to handle at the start of the year, like scare them until they're ready to, that stuff is like, it's gone, and they're just not responding to that. And so it's becoming a bit more of an art and a craft and a skill to create relationship that makes scholars feel safe and ready to learn.
One thing I might add that John's been doing that he didn't mention is, you talked about this concierge service of like, you can reach out, I need a thought partner. He made an open invitation to school leaders and said, if you want me to come spend a day on your campus and just be available to your staff, like open office hours, come see me. And what was interesting is that half of the folks who come by want to ask him about like a well-being challenge that they're having personally, but half are asking for one-on-one coaching on a classroom management or a scholar situation that they're like, I can't figure out how to crack that nut. And so when John goes onto a campus, we're seeing that his day is full because people are just seeking again extra thought partnership.
And what do you do, like when, a recent example in a classroom, a teacher just kindly wanted everybody in the classroom to stand, and half of them would not. And so then your neurochemistry shifts, you get frustrated, and you start using 1- and 2-word commands. That's when you lose people. Like, stand up! And you start to hear an elevation in their tone, which is a sort of a frustration, but they still won't stand up. Like, what does one do? So when that becomes like increasingly the case, throughout a person's day, like the levels of teacher stress and leader stress that we're seeing is equally concerning. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you. Very comprehensive. just want to switch topics
A little lighthearted.
and maybe not so.
For about a minute until we get to enrollment.
But John and Deborah are going to talk to us about the development.
I do like.
It's like really hard work.
Oh, there you go. This is our first slide. So, go ahead. We did not rehearse. So, yes, we're going to shift now on to why we need money. John makes sure our teachers feel supported and our kids can feel whole and ready to learn. So as you all know, we launched new fund development committee about a year ago, maybe COVID time. And our focus has been on really thinking about what does the organization need as we continue to grow and how can we seed some operating dollars to our organization to support things that obviously are coming up in our schools, as you heard from John and Daniel earlier. So we launched the annual fund. To date, we have raised $321,000. We have about 41% of our award giving. I've gotten a couple commitments tonight, so that percentage is going up. We have an overall goal on the programmatic fundraising side and annual fund. Programmatic meaning really designated towards specific programs, close to $5 million for this year. We're at 934, 623. We have pipelines into other funds, so I'm not that concerned about that number. And our annual fund goal is 1.3 million, so that number I'm a little concerned about. But our annual fund letters were a little bit delayed getting out due to just issues we were having with our database. So you can see there kind of the budget is the blue bar, the amount raised is the orange bar, and the gray bar is what we have pledged to date.
How many letters went out on the annual fund?
Oh, that's a really good question. Close to 2,000, and what we did was we specifically made asks in every single letter. So where we had good data on people, we asked people for, if they gave $25,000 previously, we said, would you please give us $25,000? And so far, the letters that are coming in, they're giving us what we've asked, which is really great. On the lower dollar amounts, we just asked, and we give 50, 100, 250 or more, just to give a little bit more opportunity to grow, but we didn't want to take a guess on what people would give. So far, I think the strategy of putting a specific amount is great. And when I added it up, 100% of people gave, which I know they won't. It's a $3 million something database of folks of what's given in the past.
Yes, in casual conversation, I think there's a general sentiment, and it's said very casually, not a dedicated focus group on education, but just sort of cocktail chatter, that schools have more money than they know what to do with. They can't spend it. It's just sitting there. And, you know, I'm in education, so I know that's not true, but are there 2 or 3 talking points that just could sort of articulate why we still need to give money to Uplift when there's billions of dollars being given by the federal government?
Absolutely. I think the short answer to that is all those dollars are already spent and accounted for to cover COVID-19 attendance loss, and Jim will be able to speak to it more articulately than I can. Some things you have to spend towards very specific items like high impact tutoring, things like that. And so they're program specific, so it's not just Uplift got another $23 million and it's just sitting there waiting to be spent. It's already all accounted for based on requirements by the federal government. There's a few that give you a little bit of flexibility, but we're using it really to cover our budget shortfall on enrollment. So there is no, we're in the negative, truthfully, right? Not negative, but
We would be host if we did not have ESSER dollars right now.
there's your talking.
Like, yes, I honestly would. And I'll also now, like, talking points to the whole board has them, but in short, because the state knows that school systems got ESSER dollars, they have had zero motivation to support the enrollment and attendance losses that we are incurring. So if you talk to any superintendent, everyone is using ESSER for what it was not intended for. ESSER is being used to keep the lights so that is what the unfortunate thing is. The state got $1 billion of ESSER funds to distribute. And they are not choosing to use it to give relief in those two areas. They're saying use your ESSER funds.
That's, yeah.
Right? They're saying use your ESSER funds, but that's not what ESSER was for. ESSER was for additional tutoring for kids, additional social emotional learning support. And so what's happening to us is literally at $15 million a year, ESSER was supposed to go through the 2023-24 school year. We will run out of our ESSER funds next school year, at the end of next school year. And so actually Remy and I are having a pretty tough conversation with our school leaders on Thursday to share that they have to lean in more than they've ever had to lean in on enrollment and attendance because we want to use the ESSER dollars as they were intended. And right now, they are covering enrollment and attendance shortfalls caused by the pandemic. And another factor at play is every school system had to increase compensation for teachers to stay competitive. We have a 9% vacancy rate in Uplift. We typically budget 3%, right? Like we know what that looks like. I mean, imagine that triple. And schools are not attractive places that employees want to be right now because they're structured hours and structured location, right? Versus all these other jobs that exist. So every school system had to increase compensation, which of course is what people said, don't do with their ESSER dollars. People have no staff. And so those two factors of a challenged employment market and then kids just not showing up to school on a consistent basis or transition, we're not sure where they are because every school system is down on kids. We're having to compensate that. It's a real challenge, and you might hear my voice, a deep frustration at the state level. It's like, I don't need the state to buy high-quality curriculum to send to us. Like, I don't need it. I don't need licenses for products. Like, I need, you to use your dollars to cover the budget shortfall so we can use the dollars given us for the purpose of ESSER. So it's actually been incredibly challenging, but I understand why that perception exists. It's a very natural perception for one to have. So like, Apple's got $70 million over 3 years, like what's their problem?
Yeah, that's the most common refer, and not just about Uplift, but about all schools. Like they're floating in money. We know money doesn't solve education. They just got one, they know what to do with.
Yes, that's such a great, I'm so glad you shared that feedback because it's important for us to be able to know how to address that.
If I make a couple comments, and we can also move to the next slide, which helps address your question too. But there's the chaos associated with COVID, and I think the team is doing the best they can. I would also suggest that Deborah has a staff of 2 on development, and neither position is filled because one got promoted, and I don't know what happened the other thing. She's making this progress pretty much by herself, and we met earlier this week, and I started out by apologizing that I was taking more of her time. She doesn't have the resources, and you're in the second round of interviews or something like that. But more importantly, and we've talked about this, and there's been slide presentations on this, the committee and Deborah and her team, we're trying to change the culture. So I think we also need to think about the long game, not just what we're doing with this flood of money that seems to be sent, or people think are sent our way. Back to the first presentation, Road to College and Career is not funded by state money. And we heard it, we were at one of the schools earlier from the end of last week, and we got some of the students to talk about their career counseling versus what their friends who are seniors in ISDs in the neighborhood here in South Dallas, and what kind of career counseling they're getting. And unprompted, it was basically zero. And these kids, our kids, are writing their letters of record, or not, their essays in their junior year. So that because of that extra money, we're able to do a lot more. So again, my push to Deborah, and again, my apology, we don't need to solve these problems today. We've got to get this changed for the long term. But another good use, and part of the reason we were down in Hampton is we're talking about a track. It's not a track, it's an athletic complex. We have this big grassy field with potholes so big, and the kids can't run it. And we don't get state money for this. we've got to go out and raise this money. And it all ties together because the kids don't have a Friday night lights experience. There's no sense of belonging to that school if they don't have a soccer team or a track team. So it's going to take community dollars to fund that and to fund the preschool that we're also working on, graduate pre-K. But I think to the board, we need to look long-term, like, I'm not
I need to make
showing-
sure we're good over the next
I
few
need,
years.
we can't fix the short-term issues. The professional team is going to have to sort through this, but I think we need to get ourselves out ahead and be really competitive long-term.
Who's doing that? And here's kind of the progress of where we are on these two specific projects. We have a generous pledge of $250,000 towards the Hampton Athletic Complex. We have another $250,000 in the works. And we have a pipeline of about $6 million that we're working through this year to hopefully get us through it. Now, the pipeline, we're going to try to target these two projects. It may end up being that someone decides they want to do Road to College or something else, and we obviously would never not, say no to dollars just because it didn't fit these two projects right now. But we're moving, making progress. We're not just sitting just because the team's not full yet. We are still having calls. Am I doing this or are you doing this? Okay, great. Dinner and dialogue. Elena and Christina, I don't know if y'all can hear or talk. They cannot.
I'm so sorry.
No problem. I just keep seeing them, so I would have assumed they
They're
would have dropped
actually,
off.
and I'm so sorry for the distraction of this, they are tracking the slides, and they decided they wanted to stay on and track the slides.
Oh, they're
and then
fantastic.
they were having audio issues.
So our awesome two chairs, Elena and Christina Barbosa, we'll just wave to them and say thank you, like clap, have been hard at work at Dinner and Dialogue. It is February 15th. You all got an email on it. The website for it is live. Our author is Amanda Ripley, who wrote the book, Smartest Kids in the World and How They Got There. It is a book that was published many years ago. It was really popular. I remember when I first started at Uplift, but she also now has a Netflix documentary that just helps bring her book to life, which I just recently watched. I just think it's interesting to watch the kids she talks about in their school environments, and I think we can all learn from that. I feel like she's great because even if you're not in the education world, if you're a parent, you might be really interested in, wow, what are the kids in Finland doing, or in Korea, or wherever. So she'll have some great information to share with us, and it'll be the typical fireside chat. It's intellectual date night. We encourage everyone to participate. If you want to go to the next slide. Kind of our host committee so far. If you want to click to the next one. This is where we are on table sales so far. Our goal is to hit $300,000. We have 30 tables. So far we've raised $102,000, 14 tables. We're getting a lot of $5,000 tables, which is great, but we really want to encourage you all as you're reaching out to your networks, your companies, to think bigger, think $10,000, $25,000 for us to be able to reach our goal. Because the rest of the tables are sold at $5,000. We will never hit $300,000, or we'll have to raise a lot of money in the room that night. And it's not exactly set up that way to do that. It is a cultivation event. We do want you to bring friends who want to be introduced to Uplift, as well as donors who might write $500,000, $10,000 check, whatever it may be. But really the primary vehicle to get funding for this is through our table sales. What am I missing?
I mean, just double stamp that point, right? To get to 300,000, we really need our mix of tables to be 2 to 4 at the $25,000 level, 6 at the $10,000 level, and then we can handle 5,000 at the rest, because we don't want to have to go into the room needing to raise more than $75,000. If you think about it, the beauty of this event is it's not a traditional fundraising event. It's small. So we have 300 people. If you assume 150 couples, then literally even at $75,000, you're looking for on average each couple to be giving around $500. Let's take HKS is an example, our architecture firm, they sponsored a larger table amount, but they're going to invite employees, and they're likely not going to be giving because their company already did a big sponsorship. So now take them out of the mix, right? So it just raises the what has to happen in the room, and at some point we just know that's not feasible given the size of this event, and that's why the mix of tables matters. And at some point, Deborah and I talked about we're so early on table sales, right? Like I actually feel great at 14 tables. Like we just opened this up right like around Thanksgiving. We're just going to say sold out at the $5,000 level, and like the next level up is 10,000. So just to make sure we get the mix of tables that we need. So if you all just keep that in mind as we are getting ready for this event, and even who you're inviting to your table, that is also really important.
James has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so Yasmin, Deborah, this is great. So I know that on the recommendation we received from Adam, there he is, and his firm, a couple of years ago, we reorganized this board, we redid everything, we're trying to get things where they need to be. I saw a slide earlier, maybe I misunderstood it. I saw something that said 41% board involvement or...
So far.
So far.
Since we launched the annual fund.
Which is just a couple weeks ago.
Well, what does that mean?
40% of the board
Of
members
giving
say
toward
it's
annual fund or dinner and dialogue. And
So
both of those.
40% of our board is given towards...
So far.
Yes. We're giving people grace. You know people will make their December end and you're getting. We need the percentage to come up.
There's grace and there's judgment. So, so we're at 40%. So 40% have given. We reorganized the board with Adam's good work.
I'm not sure that was us.
It's not your fault, it's your responsibility, so young man. Okay, so 40% of the board has committed to this. Okay.
We believe that everyone will get there by the end of the year.
Well, and I will tell you, I have not committed yet.
I haven't.
Right? So confess judgment, we go to church together, be right up front. It's inexcusable if you're going to be the board of this organization and not give to this event. Either vote with your feet, vote with your pocketbook, vote with your kids, vote with something, but if you don't vote, then don't be involved. So, I just want to make sure that I had this correct. That's all right. So, I know where I'm at. Andre, I know where you're at.
You can ask out to Melinda for your table.
That's fine. No, I understand that, but this is something that's really important, and when part of the reason why we reorganized this organization is because we wanted the persons involved to do it. Now, giving something doesn't mean giving everything, right? So it doesn't, but 41% participation is unacceptable, and I am disappointed in myself for being at 59% right now, and I'm going to fix that. And if we don't have 100% participation, that is going to be very disappointing to me. And it doesn't matter to me. There's a point of sacrificial giving that we all know what we need to do, but 41% is unacceptable. And that was one of the reasons why we reorganized this board. So I'm embarrassed that I'm in the 59%. I'm going to get right, and I expect everybody else that's in the 59% to get right quick.
So,
I just want to make sure I understood that statistic. I'm disappointed in us and me.
we are counting good work because we know the annual fund letters came out at the same time as dinner dialogue. That was not the intention of having the two come out at the same time. Either way you give counts towards your board giving. Like some people are able to do both, some people aren't. That's not a big deal. Really, the most important thing is percentage of board giving. We do want to get to 100%. Deborah and I do get asked that by foundations when we make.
Yeah, I can ban her up. What's the percentage that we insist upon our kids when they graduate from our schools? What percentage do we insist upon them on getting into college?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
I'm just
Well, then, I think we ought to vote as a board, and I think we ought to hold ourselves responsible the same way we vote with the kids. And I'm in the 59%. So I'm part of the problem. But I just think that we ought to be 100%.
When we're in
Sorry to interrupt.
If that number's not up in January, we'll have a tougher conversation. But I'm gonna give everyone some grace that you just got your letters, and we just released the table.
Well, I'm bringing it up at the next board meeting. We better have 100%. Even if it's $1, we need to be 100%.
So,
The one comment I will add is, if you're not ready to write your check, at least make the pledge.
Absolutely,
That can
absolutely.
count, and obviously we expect that you will follow through with the pledge. But that, just the communication that you're committed is also important to get that number up higher quicker.
And our giving cycle is the same as our school calendar. So we started this.
John, will you lecture this group on rhythm of giving and the importance of it? I know you know this.
I don't think the group needs lecture. I will also point out, and I appreciate what you said, but I think we need to move on. But at the last meeting, we were at 16%. So we made significant progress. I'm actually pleased where we are, and we're going to get there. So.
We will get there.
Well, and more importantly, I think a lot of us also gave a lot of names to add to the list. So hopefully it'll actually be a broader contribution than just coming from ourselves. And that has not been done in the past.
Yes,
exactly.
Exactly.
Super awkward because I have to leave, but so I'm going to say I'm in the 59%, but my company is on record. It will contribute, and personally we will contribute, and I've gotten extended family members to contribute. So I will be in that number hopefully by next board meeting. But we do our annual giving between Thanksgiving and Christmas every year, so that's what we're not in yet. I will say for the speaker, just to change the topic a little bit, I did have the good fortune of seeing her when she was in Dallas a few years ago. She's amazing. She's a storyteller. And she really talks about transforming education, and she uses wonderful real-life examples from Finland and Korea, and I can't remember the third country, but they're very humanizing, and at least the talk I saw, she actually showed some video clips too of the school environment, and so anyone who's interested in transforming education, which I imagine this room is, it's a worthwhile event. And then you get the bonus of, being in that 100% category. So with that,
It's
sorry,
good.
I have to go. But
But I'm going to move that because we need to, I do want to thank everyone on enrollment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know you're going to keep rolling. And
Keep
I'll
rolling.
support.
Someone else.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears on to why we may need even more fundraising in the future. So, in the next few months, we'll be working with my friend Jim on the budget and approving the budget for Uplift. And that is very much tied to scholar recruitment and enrollment, which you all have heard, right, is really difficult right now. We've been in the trenches. So a miss in our enrollment in revenue for next year could mean $8 to $10 million to our organization, which would mean we would fully shift what we're raising money for, and we would just double down on trying to do this. And then, hopefully be able to maintain some sort of capital campaign support that aligns to our strategic plan. So it would shift our strategy on the fundraising side. So it is a significant revenue loss to the organization. So where we are today, we are down. That's why we wanted to talk to you about it. Definitely not throwing in the towel, but this is the last 3 years of applications. The good news is we're up from last year, which was a really bad year, but we're significantly down. There's been a downward trend over the last many years of applications to charter schools, generally speaking. There's increased competition. These are first choice applications. These are the best potential things we can have for a seat at Uplift, right? If you made a first choice application at Uplift and you get called, you will likely take that seat. If it's your third or fourth choice, it's unlikely that that's going to happen, even with probably the best salesperson calling you. Sometimes you can shift those, but it's really small percentage shift. Next slide, 30. This is all choices, first, second, and third choice. So that makes our numbers go up a little bit higher, but when we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see it by division, by grade level, and by school. And you can see North Hills takes the large majority of applications This is again, all applications, so they're roughly half of all applications to Uplift, which is consistent with what we've seen in the years, but even that is down. Even Northville's applications are down from previous years, so it's not, across Uplift. The yellow schools you'll see are primary schools only, so there's those standalone K through 5s, which have their own kind of challenges. I suppose kind of like to see themselves on the full K through 12 campus, if that's a possibility. So if you are, hopefully Gratis is a second choice to Hampton. If they don't get into Hampton, then they would naturally take that Gratis seat that's just a couple minutes down the road. So this is where we are. Kindergarten is looking healthy enough. You can see as we progress into the older grades, it definitely goes down. Now we don't take as many 11th and 12th, definitely not 12th grade spots. Very unique situations that happens unless 10th and 11th grade, but those do come in from time to time. Next slide. So, I've been talking to this. It's decreased year over year. The ISDs are marketing. I mean, every time we put out something, I promise our neighboring ISD copies us almost verbatim. They name their events the same things as us. It's very intentional. I guess the flattering piece is we're clearly a competitor. The unflattering part is, we have one program. We are an IB schools with an awesome Road to College and Career program. And the thing that we're fighting now is just in the marketplace, there's so much choice, especially at the high school level. So you want to go here and go be a computer scientist or get into the nursing pathway. That is obviously the work that is not there anymore. Daniel is negotiating and trying to figure out moving forward. And then the other piece is we are seeing increased attrition in the high school. So kids leaving for those big comprehensive high schools. Some of them come back, but they do leave for sometimes an easier environment, football, whatever it might be that's attracting them. Got one more slide. So our focus attention, we are increasing our recruitment team. We're hiring alumni. We have quit sending our people out to flyer neighborhoods. We're hiring companies to do that. We're just being smarter in the way that we do the work. We are developing, or we have pre-K partnerships. So over the holidays here next week, our team is going to do this holiday helper event where they're going to dress up like snowman and go through child care centers, through Carline, and see parents, so we can really try to attract those folks to our schools. We're working with our school leaders. Priscilla and her team, the family engagement team, are working for 6th to 9th grade transition, so we can hold those kids, and that's really the easiest way to keep our numbers to where we can just focus on kindergarten. We have increased our marketing spend, as Jim knows, this last year. We are really measuring our campaigns. They're competitive. We can't not spend the dollars because we have Idea Public Schools and DISD and now Fort Worth ISD and Irving ISD. Everyone's out in the media marketplace. And then I know Remy and Mike and Daniel are just exploring what creative ways we can make high school 10th and 11th grade more choice-like in comparison to our ISDs. So we just wanted to put this on your radar. Our team is continuing to work through these challenges, and it is challenges that we're seeing across the country, but it could potentially affect the budget in a pretty meaningful manner.
So we believe we're going to be fighting on enrollment until the first day of school next year. That's just going to be what it is.
Like second week of school.
Second week of school. It's just going to be a slugfest, right? And that's fine. We're all leaning in to get that done. But we're used to seeing, we saw a big pop in apps and everybody's managing really on to people, and that's not the case right now. We're going to continue to have to drive applications. So we'll approve the budget in June. Finance committee's going to meet every single month, starting in January. We'll start running scenarios to just understand where we're at. Again, we're okay for next year. We've been in a really horrible situation because of ESSER, but we don't want to have to use ESSER for that because we want to have ESSER dollars for 23-24. So that's why we are thinking multi-year out right now, and that's how we'll do the work with the finance committee is, okay, how does this play out over the next couple of years?
And plus, the ISD and Fort Worth created an academy public model now.
Yes, yes,
Right?
yes, yes.
Turning into not just public, right? Academy public, right?
They're creating partnership models too. So that was just context for you, not trying to end on a negative note. It's important you know what we're dealing with as we are going into budget season. So we just have a quick administrative item, and I'll.
There we go. Sorry, we had to get back to the governance update slide. Thanks, everyone. Very briefly here, I know we want to get everybody out of here on time this afternoon. I know Dawn is our amazing new chair of the governance committee. She was on virtually. I know we were kind of having some issues with the virtual participants a little bit ago, so Dawn is not actually currently with us. That's totally fine, but shout out to Dawn and all the amazing work she and the committee are doing we go to the next slide, please. For the new Uplift Fort Worth Advisory Board Committee. For those on the executive committee team, at the October 26th meeting, the executive committee voted to approve a new board committee. That is the Uplift Fort Worth Advisory Board Committee. It's not a CAC chair like the old structure we used to have. This committee is aimed at advising on best practices for anything and everything Fort Worth. Recommendations, things of that nature. The governance committee is recommending our very own, not surprisingly, Andre McEwing to be chair of the new board committee. Of course, given all of his amazing work here with Uplift, and of course all this long-standing, amazing engagement in Fort Worth. So if there are any questions on that.
Did we just misspell it on the slide or what?
Yes, we're very sorry. I just apologize to Andre.
Yeah.
It was a typo on the board agenda that got carried around.
I just want to let you know someone's paying attention.
Yes.
I think it's an audio correct.
Mr. Chairman.
Andrew,
Hey, we're in the 59% together.
Yeah.
The bottom half makes the top half possible.
Andrew, my apologies.
Andrew.
I'm not saying.
We make a motion?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks,
Colin.
I would be honored to move that we nominate, I feel like Andre, I messed it up again. Andre McEwing as chair of the Uplift Fort Worth Advisory Board.
I want to second it just because I noticed the problem on the slide and people have good songs.
I'm looking at Michelle because I know Michelle will take this back to my mom. And so
Any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote.
Congratulations.
Thank
Let
you,
me
Andre.
just say one thing, Richard. Exactly. Most of you know I'm the son of two public school teachers and a product of choice. So for me personally, to be the ambassador, the advisory word, I get it, but it's been an ambassador for Uplift in Fort Worth. We know Dallas, we know Fort Worth. And I think this is an opportunity to say we have a face we're committed for the last 10 years, 11 years in Fort Worth. So I appreciate the support. Deborah, whatever we need to do to talk to the philanthropic community, we'll do that, because I think we just need to make sure, Michelle, you know what we need to do. So just know our personal and professional and educational commitment is there with Uplift, and we'll make sure that folks know Uplift, because there are a lot of other people that want to, and I'll say this biasly, want to play like they know how to do education in the classroom, but with the same results, as evidenced by a former mayor calling out the superintendent publicly in the paper, which was very interesting, to say the least. So we're about business, and I appreciate the support of the entire board, but we'll be making those having those direct conversations, obviously here, Cullen and Richard, here soon. So this is real. All the things we just heard, this is serious. In some cases, life or death, as we know in Michigan, in Mansfield. So we've got to get this right. And so for me personally, I appreciate support, but we'll be the ambassador for Uplift and Forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and Andre, we have realized that you have, you could vote with your feet with other organizations. You chose to vote with us, and you stood with us for a long, long time, and it makes a big difference. Yeah.
Carrie, if you don't mind forwarding us to the administrative actions, I would appreciate it. There we go. Thanks, Carrie. So up next, taking a look, we have an updated internet safety policy. We have a current internet safety policy. It addresses and requires compliance with state, federal law, things of that nature. The updated version is more comprehensive. We wanted it to be more comprehensive. It requires, as did the previous one, compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act. It's really kind of a very, kind of a litany of very reasonable things, things that you would expect in a safety policy. Training, how to spot abuse, cyberbullying, things of that nature. I know our IT team is currently vetting out new training for our scholars. So we're excited to get this up and running. So we did want to bring this to the board this evening for a vote. And are there any questions on that before I move to the warehouse?
You received it via your email.
I'm sorry?
They got it via email.
Yes, you got a copy of these as part of the
Internet
report.
safety policy.
And it was short and brief, and so do I have a motion to approve the updated internet safety policy as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Michael. Your second. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. We'll move to the next item.
I'll take this one, Alex.
Oh,
So,
okay.
there was a question around like, why do we need to have a warehouse at Uplift? So, previously, we used space at Uplift Williams and Uplift Meridian to use for both storage and configuring of IT equipment. So if you can imagine, at the start of every school year, we bring in thousands of devices that have to be imaged and then redeployed out to campuses, and that requires large amounts of workspace. And so we did that in the back half of Uplift Meridian, which was set up to basically serve as our in-house warehouse. We need that space for classrooms, especially when we expanded pre-K. So we have now repurposed both Williams and Meridian to only be classroom space. And that meant we did that going into knowing we would need a warehouse similar to other ISDs that have discrete warehouse space. As you can see, the cost per square foot is equivalent to a warehouse space. We really were agnostic of where it was geographically located. It needed good freeway access because of the shipments that come in and out of it, and to be relatively central in the network. So you can see it's over in South Dallas. It's about 20,000 square feet. It's a little over $2 a square foot. And so over the 7 years, the total cost of the lease is about $2 million. It's accounted for in our budget. We are still working through between the two legal teams the nuances of the contract, back and forth. And so our resolution tonight to ask for is that Alex and I continue to bring that to finality with, under these terms, the financial terms are not going to change, and that you approve us getting Richard and Cullum's approval to go ahead and get it finalized so we can move forward and be ready for our team to move in relatively shortly. As you can imagine, it's warehouse. There's very little TI that needs to happen because of the way the space is used. So that is what our ask is tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions about this specific lease.
I move for approval.
Thanks, Sean.
Second.
Thanks, Cam. Right.
Okay.
Close us.
So I have a motion to grant authority.
John and Cam.
Let's see, are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Are we going to close session?
Nope, you can take us to adjournment.
So the time is now
6:15.
6:15, and there is no further business pending before the board. This meeting is hereby adjourned. The time is 6:15.
Awesome.